Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Raul Avila, along with my co-host, Pastor Nate Conan. How are you doing today, Pastor Nate?
It's a good day.
You're a grandpa now. Congratulations.
I don't think I'm that old yet. But
This is Father's Voice, the podcast dedicated to empowering men to embody essential qualities and values in the roles of father, husband, provider, and man of God. In each of these episodes, we will chase greatness, drawing inspiration from timeless wisdom of the Bible and personal experiences from many of our guests. And we're confident you're going to love this. Make sure you share, subscribe, comment, and all that good stuff. So let's get the ball rolling, Pastor.
Today's a good day. So in the Coachella Valley, it's warm, but today we have a hot guest. So by that, I mean, we're just pumped. So we have a guest today. He's very insightful, very intelligent. He's a father. He is an amazing husband. And as well, he served in a few capacities in terms of law enforcement, which I'm looking forward to get into that later on. He was the assistant chief up in the city of Seattle. And then in the Coachella Valley, he was the chief at Indio Police Department for several years. How many years?
A little over 7.
7 years. He's a fantastic man, a man of God, and it is a delight to have him as our guest today.
Awesome. I'm excited too.
Well, thank you. The honor is mine.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
So why don't we start with telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, stuff that you've
Highlights.
Yeah, highlights, and then we could get back and
We'll jump in with your
childhood.
past. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a family of 4. My dad was in the Air Force, and pretty standard.
What city?
childhood.
Where at? Were you born at?
So I was born in Wenatchee, Washington, which is
Okay.
in central Washington. And then, my dad went to Vietnam. We ended up moving around the country quite a bit, never overseas for us, but he had several assignments overseas. Father, mother, sister, it's the family of 4. We were pretty tight-knit, Back in those days, they would move families quite a bit. And so I'd been in multiple schools, even in kindergarten, just because that's the way the military did it back then. So it tends to draw your family closer because your support system is your nuclear family. By the time we got to Washington State when I was in the 4th grade or so, we got back to, my dad got stationed in McChord Air Force Base in Western Washington, and my dad had acquired enough rank that he wasn't going to get moved much anymore. And so really grew up in Western Washington for the most part from...
Was this 70s and 80s?
Yes.
Okay.
So we had moved down from, he was stationed in Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska for 3 years. Then he got stationed at McChord Air Force Base. So I ended up going all the way through high school and college, got my bachelor's degree, and then...
What year did you graduate?
1981.
81, there you go. All right.
When you guys were traveling, what do you remember about that? That you moved a lot. Right now my brother's in the Army, and he got married. He has 2 little kids, and his first place when he joined the Army in his 30s, he's in North Carolina, and then currently he's in Italy, somewhere near
Venice.
Venice, somewhere Venice. So what's the life of a kid that's traveling with a military family?
Well, I'll tell you one story. So we were stationed in Hamilton Air Force Base, which is Northern California, and then my dad got assigned to Elmendorf. So I was a 7-year-old kid. My sister's 2 years older than me. So we were told, hey, you're moving up. It's summertime. You're only going to need sweaters. Don't worry about it. So we drove up the Alcan Highway, which is back then was all dirt. So a dirt road. My dad bought a truck and camper for this experience, and we had it so packed we couldn't turn on the heat. Well, here we are, kids from California. It snowed overnight when we were in Canada, on the way up. And then I remember just freezing to death, walking to school with only a sweater, and it's still dark out.
And that's in Alaska.
Yeah, and my dad was just an enlisted guy. He didn't have a whole lot of resources, so I remember we had to wait to buy coats, and so we had some struggles. It was a good life.
Do you find it easy to make friends? So if you're moving around pretty frequently, as a military kid, you're dropped into a new school. Long-term relationships I think are the best, but obviously, how was that as far as making friends? You found it easy or difficult?
When we moved to Alaska, we were going to schools on base. So all the other kids were in the same boat, right? So it wasn't that big of a deal. Being moved as many times as we did, my sister and I always preferred to, let's do a move in the summer so that we can start fresh with everybody. Or the second best option was right after Christmas break. Because it's almost like, okay, everyone's kind of new. But it's certainly had its challenges. I remember when we moved to Alaska, I was completely lost with school. I mean, they were teaching stuff I'd never seen before. I was only in the third grade, but I'm like, I have no idea what she's talking about.
Wow.
I remember a specific incident where, I was called up to the front of the class. Is it a short vowel sound or a long vowel sound? I didn't know what she was talking about. So I guessed, and I got it right. So
genius.
It was good. So it struggled. So that was the first time I really struggled academically, which was I was completely lost. I remember my mom was trying to catch me up, reading constantly after school, and then finally got school figured out by the time I was in the 8th grade. And then was an exceptional student after that.
Did it ever attract you joining the military because your dad was in the military? Did he ever push that on you? Is that something that happens or no?
He never pushed it. He said if I ever went into the military, then I needed to go in as an officer. So he really pushed the education. I was actually the first one to get a college education at the bachelor's degree level. And my dad was right after me. So
that's cool.
So he continued to work through that. And then after he finished a 30-year career in the Air Force, he worked another 20 at Boeing.
Nice.
And what do you remember about your dad's parenting style? And would you say that was effective for you? Did you practice that as a father early in your?
I would say just based upon, so he was gone a lot on different military assignments, and I think we were in North Dakota, and my dad came home and I didn't know who he was. There's a strange man in my house type thing. I don't know who this is.
How old were you?
I was just 3 or 4 years old, right? So my mom did the bulk of the parenting. What's interesting about military families is that role change. So mom's kind of running everything. She's the CEO of the house. She's in charge of discipline when dad's not there, and then dad tries to step in.
Yeah.
And so I saw some struggles with that. How do you let go? Like my dad, when I was in high school, my dad was stationed in Okinawa for a year. He decided not to move us there. Because we were in high school, that kind of stuff. And then after that, he got assigned to Scott Air Force Base on an inspection team. And we were going to move. I was I think, a sophomore in high school. And he decided, I'm on an inspection team. I'm not going to be there anyway. So you guys finish up high school where you're at.
That's good. So if you were to look at your father, in terms of the relationship you had with him, was it a positive relationship? And is there any story that would sort of convey like the love your father had for you, or a positive story, probably preteen, so sometimes as a child, positive story of your father, and how was your relationship with him, especially in childhood?
We had a great relationship. When we were in Alaska, I remember multiple times it was just him and me going out fishing. And so, in Alaska, you actually catch fish. So
It's catching, not just fishing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, a side note, when we moved down to Washington and we went fishing for the first time, I'm like, this is crazy.
Boring.
Exactly. I'm like, because when you're in Alaska, you would limit out, right? I'm like, okay, we've been here for 2 hours and we're done, or whatever it was. And like salmon is what you're catching. So, but yeah, had a great time with my dad. He's still with me. I lost my mom a couple of years ago. But my dad is actually going to come down for a visit. So he's in great shape, in his 80s.
And you're how old right now?
I am 61.
Good. Good. And so your overall relationship with your father was positive as a child, for sure?
Yes, absolutely. My mom was the spiritual leader in the household.
Yeah, that's oftentimes what happens in America.
And really had a much larger role, because when he would go away, she's in charge of everything.
Yeah. And so as far as your religious upbringing, what kind was it? Catholic, Christian, what there's a lot of different flavors out there.
So so probably the main influence was Spanaway Assembly of God Church.
That's AG.
Yeah.
Good.
In Washington. And we went every time the doors were open, we were there.
Wow. So your mom was very dedicated.
Yeah. So twice on Sundays and on Wednesdays as well. And then we were involved in the choir, and we did all the events. And so it was a great upbringing.
And would you agree that sometimes the spiritual family can supplement in the absence of your father? Because obviously you've acknowledged that. Sometimes the spiritual family can fill in some of those voids in terms of being a spiritual family. And sometimes when your dad's not there, that whole community of faith can sometimes fill sometimes in for that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I learned, it probably benefited me as an adult, now that you mention it, is I was not shy about looking to others outside of my family for a little guidance.
Oh, wow. Good.
And so, and that's important, particularly in adult life and high stress jobs, right? Who is speaking into your life? Who is guiding you?
Well said.
I remember growing up, in college, I remember there was a father figure in my life. Did you have, besides your dad, and especially when he wasn't around, a father figure that you remember that you would like to mention, and maybe even say some of the things that he did to impact your life? Is there somebody like that?
I wouldn't say a specific person. I do see, though, when my dad was in Vietnam, I was just a youngster, and we moved back to Wenatchee and lived there. And our next door neighbor, I remember he watched out for us all the time. We would go have dinner, and he was a Wenatchee police officer.
Ah. And that may explain some things, then, right? So some mentoring or some, like a positive role model for sure.
Yes.
Wow. What was his name?
I don't remember.
Wow. And so was that more in the high school later in life? Or
no, I was just a little kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was a positive role model.
Is that where your dream or vision or idea of, you know what, I think I might want to be a police officer?
Probably not.
No.
So I had planned on actually following in my dad's footsteps and moving toward the Air Force, and wanted to be a pilot. And my eyes went bad in college with all the reading. And so that was kind of the end of that. Although at the end of the day, I also see it as that was God just pushing me the right direction.
For sure.
Because coming out of high school, my friends and I literally went down to Boeing Field. There's a place called Flight Craft, which teaches, they're a commercial airline pilot school. And so showed up, hey, I want to be a commercial airline pilot one day. What do you think? what should I study in school? And they're like, we don't care. You have to have a 4-year degree, but you don't care on what. Well, I was waffling between, do I want to study law enforcement, policing stuff, or what do I study? And so that kind of settled it. Okay, I'm going to study policing because they don't care. So eyes went bad. By that time, I kind of fell in love with the whole concept of serving and policing.
What is that degree? Police? What's the degree that you actually graduated from?
So I have a law and justice is the name of my bachelor's degree, and then I went on later. I was already a captain in the Seattle Police Department and finished off my master's, which is administration of justice.
So what got you to fall in love with the service field as a police officer?
So at a community college, I went to a community college first, and at the community college level, I had folks who had actually done the work, going back to, so there was a DEA agent who became a professor, and he was one of the instructors. The other one was retired Navy pilot, and then he became a police officer. And so I think that really enriched it, and at least when I was going to the community college in Washington State, many folks were getting their degrees that were already police officers. So I was around it a lot, just learning about it, and got to hear the war stories and that kind of stuff as well.
Since we're already in the law enforcement thing, we'll stay here for a minute. So I would just taking the pulse of society overall. For a long time, police was held in sort of a positive light, and I think probably over the last 5 to 6 years, I think generally there's more of a negative perspective of law enforcement. I think that would be accurate, just generally speaking, like the news over, like most. I mean, that's not how I raise my kids. Like every time we see law enforcement, we always honor them. But I just think generally speaking, there's probably a little more less. There's not a positive light on law enforcement, and so acknowledging that, I'm just saying from the news, maybe an overview. Just there's been some missteps made with law enforcement. In being in law enforcement, does that sometimes, because you were in it for how many years?
37,
almost 40 years. Yeah. Was that always the way that it was in terms of people looking at? I know you deal with criminals, but the general public, I don't think there was a negative connotation to be involved in law enforcement, but I think the last 5+ years or so have been. Is that accurate to say that?
Absolutely. Well, and I started in 1986 is when I was hired, and Seattle was much smaller then. There was definitely a different flavor in the city. There was much more concern about having law and order, and then it all changed. And particularly in that city.
And for the good or bad?
For the bad.
I think so.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
And so a lot of negative stuff. We had over 200 demonstrations a year.
200?
Yes. And
against police officers?
Not against police officers all the time, but
Yeah.
that certainly was an element. And anytime anything went bad in that city, anytime anything went bad anywhere in the nation, like there was a bad law enforcement incident that should have never occurred in Philadelphia, they would be protesting at the East Precinct, right?
My opinion, this is going to be different, but I think there's a spiritual component. I'm not trying to over-spiritualize, but I do think there's a spiritual component to a lot of that rebellion, for lack of a better. I'm sure there's I don't get me wrong. I'm all for the First Amendment. I'm all for Americans peacefully protesting. Like when something bad happens, get out on the street, carry your sign, holler, yell, whatever. But I think things have gotten really unusual where I think there's a spiritual component to what's going on at this point, especially throughout most of American, specifically even Seattle. Seattle's maybe a little more exaggerated than most cities, I think, in terms of large cities, right? How would you speak to that spiritual part of it? Do you agree that there's something spiritually that's probably happening as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also a lack of accountability. Like everything's the fault. I mean, police officers, sheriff's deputies are the most visible element of government. And
authority.
Right.
Yeah.
And so blamed for a lot of stuff. And it's like maybe if you raised your kid better, it wouldn't have to arrest them. And so there's that element. There is a lot of negativity, and police are just people.
Yeah.
They're
right,
humans too.
right? And so we hire from the human, and getting people out of law enforcement who don't belong there
Yeah.
is good. But
Was that part of your job duty description to find those bad cops, I guess?
It's got to be hard.
well, I can tell you when I would swear people in at the academy in Seattle, I would always talk about, don't forget why you got into policing. For me, I hate bullies. And I would tell them that. I hate bullies. And I would tell them, if you become a bully wearing my badge, someday I will fire you. And I would be that, and then I would fill it with positive. But a lot of people are drawn to policing because of something that the good Lord has put a passion on your heart that just cannot stand. It's defending the weak. It's right. It's all of that. And so bullies, it just rubs me the wrong way.
Would you say that people become a police officer because they were bullied, and now they want to have that power to not be? What do you think about that? I mean, that's not just something that crossed my mind based on what you said.
It really goes back to the why. I mean, I've heard as hiring them here or in Seattle, doesn't matter. People would tell you stories. I want to be a police officer because my dad abused my mom, and so they're going to gravitate towards something. Or my brother got killed by a drunk driver. I guarantee you they're going to be an officer that's focused on DUI stuff. And so you would see those passions and fueling that and encouraging that. Like, don't forget why you got here. If it's that one thing that's driving you, let's make sure you're feeding that passion.
Let me ask you this. So my son obviously is in police academy right now in San Bernardino. So he got hired by a police department here in the Valley. What advice would you give to a young person? Because even one of the concerns I have for him is, I would say the majority of law enforcement are just good people, and they're doing a great job. And then there's some that are not. I mean, you acknowledge that there's some that had to be removed. And how does a person stay grounded? And I know that, like, if somebody has faith, I think that's going to help them grounded. But what would be your advice to a young man going into, like, even speaking to my son, how does he stay grounded where he doesn't get all these, aberrant actions and behaviors? How do you stay grounded?
Well, you've said it first. First and foremost, hire good people. Are they good to their soul? Yes or no? And if they're not, they don't belong in law
How do you get that? Like, I mean, you were probably doing that. So based on your experience, how did you find a good person in their core and somebody that just had a bad heart? How do you even determine that? How do you cut open a
you try.
person?
That's hard. That's so hard.
It is difficult. There's a lot of scientific methods that are used. It's something that we instituted once I arrived in Indio. Is like, there's science to this. Let's use it. And so we used a couple of different. They have to go through a psychological and all that kind of stuff. But even before you get there, what do we know about this person? How do they answer things? How do you interview them? You're not going to catch them all. But we do a pretty good job about it in policing in this country, particularly in the West Coast.
What was the reason you got involved in the police field? What was the thing that maybe happened to you when you were younger or in college? Or
were you bullied? Or
I was bullied. When we lived in Alaska, I remember trying to get to school without getting beat up, and there was some bullies there, and just that, it just seemed too many kids who weren't treated right, etc. And so for me, I think a lot of it was kind of defending the people who don't have a voice, which kind of goes back to immigration issues, right? I'm like, look, we don't care. Local law enforcement doesn't care. Look, you shouldn't be bullied. And I'd seen that a lot in Seattle as well, which was, when you have a very diverse community that doesn't speak English, they get preyed upon by their own culture, right? These people have been here a little longer, and they're going to tell you stuff that's not true. Hey, the police are going to come over here, and they're corrupt like they were in Cambodia and where you grew up or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
So you mentioned in Seattle there's a lot of protests, and then you also mentioned something about how if they were raised properly, and you also mentioned something about the core family, right?
Yeah,
so
nuclear family.
The nuclear family, yeah. People, is that like, would you say that in Seattle there's a lot more people you mentioned like 200 plus or something like that?
What's some of the root causes? Yeah, like what's going on?
Is it because would you say that it comes mostly from liberal countries that just, because I saw a video that talks about that people that protest are people that want to change the world, but they don't want to change themselves first, and so it's more coming from a victim mindset. A
lot of them are paid. So
wow.
So they come in and they have no connection to the community, and they're literally bussed in and they get paid.
Did you have evidence of that? That it was people?
Yeah.
You did. So it's not like just a thing that's been said. There's evidence of people being paid to do this.
Correct. And
by other governments. I mean, who would want that? I mean, it just seems so.
Are you able to say more details on that?
Come on, you're retired.
Now I'm wondering, well, who?
To me, it would be like if you were some other country that is antagonistic towards us, there would be incentive to do that, right? To compensate people to be extreme protesters. To me, it would be other countries. I don't know.
Well, there's protests and there's riots and there are the whole gamut. I've been in all of them. And when you're trying to hurt people, when you're destroying property, that's not a protest.
It's no longer a protest.
That's a criminal act. And when that happens to politically line up with whomever, then that becomes a problem for policing, because we're like, we don't care who you're connected to or what your cause is. You've now crossed the line.
Yeah. It's a criminal act when they start vandalizing and destroying and getting rid of, bringing down statues and like Antifa.
Yeah,
that's
Antifa
true.
does that
for sure.
Yeah,
but a lot of them are anarchists, right?
Yes.
And so the reality, and this is, I think, the danger of, I don't know, society, and sometimes it seems like where we're heading as a country, is anarchy is desired by a lot of people. Like, in other words, let's just remove all the shackles of whatever. And they've tried that before in France, and it didn't end up that well. Like in the French Revolution, they got rid of the royalty, which maybe they should have. Then the next thing, they come for all the religious people. And then they start taking everything away until they start killing each other. And they realize, wait a second, this ain't working. So I think what's happening in America right now, a lot of times people that are in authority are the target, because I think there's and I believe it to be very spiritual. It's almost like a spirit of anarchy to destroy those that are in authority. It doesn't matter who they are. And obviously, law enforcement the easiest, because they're driving around in shiny cars with badges on them and sirens on them, and they have badges on the jet. They're the most obvious example of authority. Like fire departments, that's not authority. That's somebody to help you necessarily, right? But law enforcement is authority. And so I think right now with the anarchists, it's pervasive in all kinds of areas where it's trying to tear down authority. And we have to be careful with that, because the Bible's really clear that God gives people authority over us. And so Paul even talks about how when we attack those in authority, we're attacking God. In other words, God, and Paul says this in the context of Romans when Nero's emperor. So, I mean, we got no excuse as far as if you don't like Joe Biden or if you don't like your local mayor, they're not off killing Christians for fun. That's what they did in the time of Rome. And Paul literally defends Rome while Nero's emperor, right? And so God, for some reason, allows even sometimes corrupt people to be in authority. Nonetheless, those that desire anarchy, and I know there's a lot of people in our country today that it doesn't make any sense, but they're just anarchists, and they want to tear down every semblance of authority. And God has put that there. And so when you attack that, according to Paul, you're attacking God himself.
I mean, there's plenty of comments about today's political environment. It's
Yeah.
the same thing. Is like, when I don't get it, right? Whoever the president is, everyone should line up behind them, whether you voted for them or not.
Mm-hmm.
This is who now has the authority. Why are you? I mean, just the venomous speech that's out there constantly. It's caustic.
It is. I mean, even recently what happened with Trump, and even people that are supposedly Christians were celebrating they got shot. Now, I don't like any of Biden's policies. I mean, there's probably about 15% of Biden's policies that I like. But God allowed him to be president, straight up. And we all voted how we wanted to vote. I didn't vote for Biden. I never would, because my politics are different. My morals are much different. However, God put him there. And so in that, I see good in him. In that, I pray for him. In that, he's not perfect. Obama wasn't perfect. My God, Trump certainly wasn't perfect. But God allowed those people to be there. And so I think as people of faith, we pray for those people. We support those people. We honor the office that they're placed in. It's not our job to, I don't know, almost, like I say, attempt anarchy in our society, because we're called to honor. I mean, Paul says honor the king. And so the king's not so much anymore, but the president. So we should honor those that are in authority over us, no matter who they are, whether we agree with them or not.
Well, even enlightened self-interest. Wouldn't you want your president, whether you voted for them or not, to
do well.
to be the best president we've ever had?
Absolutely.
As opposed to rooting for them to fail? I don't get that piece of it.
Interesting. Yeah, there definitely is like hate speech, when it comes to talking about presidents and the current presidents. Well, President Joe Biden and now
soon to be Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think social media does a really good job with dividing. And
for sure,
even me when in my algorithm, my brother sends me something about that they wanted to kill Donald Trump, but it wasn't just that kid. It was like a whole thing, and then you could get into this crazy rabbit hole of conspiracy that the government wants to kill Donald Trump. But whether it's true or not, it does create some ideas in your mind, and you start thinking, man, you start creating division, and I think that's a really good point, because whenever and then some are super extreme to the one side or the other, and then it's easy to start getting emotional about hey, why if it's too far, then I just scroll away, because it's like, this is not even commentary, or it's more hate speech, Yeah, and I think we have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
No, I absolutely agree. It's not healthy, and aren't we Americans first?
For sure. Well, I think we're Christians first, then Americans next, right?
Yes.
To those of us of faith. But if
Correct.
you talked about it in the context of our nation, certainly
Right.
we're all united by a common set of values and beliefs as Americans. But to those of us in faith, we're Christians first, and then Americans next. But I do think, let me ask you this. You came from Seattle, right? So you come from a very urban, progressive area, and then you come to the Coachella Valley, which in my opinion, it's a pretty nice place to raise a family. I mean, there's better places, I'm sure, but it's, other than the hot summers, it's a fantastic place to raise a family in terms of just like generally being you might disagree with this, but like it's relatively peaceful, calm. I mean, what would you say in terms of the differences between Seattle to the Coachella Valley? What were some of the differences you noticed coming from the outside, especially in the area of law enforcement?
In Seattle, we had 3 levels of civilian oversight. And so what was interesting is that impacts culture. And so the degree to which people watched their P's and Q's as police officers was extreme. And so you would never hear, when someone got sideways with the law, a police officer did something bad and they get arrested or whatever, even the union would not support them.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a very different, because when someone gets crap on them, it got on all of us. And so there was no tolerance for people stepping out of line.
So higher level of accountability from there to here. So up there was higher levels of accountability. And I just say that in the
Yes.
sense of when you have oversight or some kind of accountability to citizens, there's a little bit more of that where they're not. I understand exactly what you're saying. Wow.
So one of the things, we had a retired judge by the name of Ann Levinson, and she would review all the internal investigations and make comment on them. And at one point, as a captain, I was in charge of responding back to her musings, I guess.
Yeah.
And sometimes she got way far afield, but there was always someone checking. It's kind of like, man, and I've said it here multiple times, if this occurred in Seattle, I would be reading it on the Seattle Times tomorrow.
I see. Interesting.
What are some of the experiences that, because you're currently retired right now, so you had a great career. What are some of the experiences that you could look back and say, man, this was a very positive experience. This is in a way my legacy. I left a mark, a positive mark. What would you say to that?
I have a lot of highlights in my career. One of the things that probably the highlight of my career in terms of me that benefited the family was I was selected to do a executive fellowship in Washington, D.C. for 6 months at FBI headquarters. And so I was able to, the timing was such that I brought the entire family with me for the summer. So we got private tours of the White House.
That'd be a blast. What years?
That was in 2003.
Oh, that'd be so much fun.
And so
did you meet the president when you were out there and all that? Or
I didn't meet the president, but a lot of directors, right? I mean, here for years I've been reading, here's the director of Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. I'm now face to face with that person. And
this is just after September 11th with 2 years. So there's still that shadow of those events around that too.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was an incredible experience. I ended up doing a desk audit and ended up somewhat of a fluke, but I'm like, this doesn't line up. I was looking at a weed and seed site in Lawton, Oklahoma. And I'm like, this doesn't add up because I was running all of Seattle's weed and seed sites.
What do you mean weed and seed?
It was a federal grant where there was a law enforcement component and then a social service component. And this had survived both a Democratic administration as well. Now they switched it, Democratic as well as Republican. When a Republican had it, it had to be at least $1 more than half has to go to law enforcement, and then it switched.
And weed as in marijuana, or weed as in?
Weed was just it was just an acronym. It wasn't an acronym. It was weeding out the bad elements of society,
Gotcha.
And then seeding in good things in the
good.
community. It was Seattle had 3 weed and seed sites, and so anyway, long story short, things weren't looking right. We ended up sending that the executive director to prison for 12 years.
Yee.
When the federal government
you don't
prosecutes you,
you're gonna lose.
They don't lose. They don't file it unless it's a slam dunk. I mean, they've got it all.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you spent 6 months in D.C. though.
6 months in Washington, a little over, almost 7 actually.
Were you impressed?
I was impressed, but it also demystified a lot of stuff for me, right? I'm like, this is how decisions are made, right? This is how we figure out how millions are going here and there.
Was it more like whim or human whatever, or was there a lot of science behind it?
There was a combination of both.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was just like, hey, I know a guy who let's, fund that person.
Interesting.
So that's how it is. It's in Washington, D.C. is the money goes to who you know. Would you say?
No, I mean, there was one incident where it kind of surprised me because everything else was a point system and that's how it was done. But make no mistake, there's also relationships that drive some stuff. Look, if you're who's the tiebreaker. I'm like, well, I actually know this person. They're probably going to get funded.
Can I drag you into something that's currently going on? Policing, if you please. I don't know if you've seen the video of the black lady in her house with hot water.
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's coming out the last 2 days. Have you seen it yet?
No.
Oh, it looks horrible. Police officer comes into a home. The lady had called the police for some reason. He goes into the home. She's there with a pot of boiling water. It's a black lady, and she makes some comments, and literally she says, "I'm going to rebuke you in Jesus' name." She wasn't actually posing any kind of threat. And the guy says, "Put down the water," and I think she did. And actually, when he shot her and she died, her hands were down, and a law enforcement, a police officer shot her and killed her. And now he's actually up for first degree, which, to be honest with you, probably rightfully so. Based upon the video, I mean, it's really hard to make judgments based upon 30 seconds of video. It really is, because we don't have no context for what really is going on. But yeah, that just happened. And it appears it might start flaring up in the news. And oftentimes it does, and we get these little snippets. What would you speak to some of those?
Well, especially in this climate.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they think it might be the next thing. I don't know. It came out, I think, yesterday.
Well, I can tell you, I was in charge of homicide for a while in Seattle. And so doing officer-involved shootings was a big piece of what we did. And there's a ton of science, and what justifies a police officer shooting someone is what's going on in their head. And
the officer's head.
Right.
Not the victim or the...
So what are you perceiving? So even though the video may look bad, and here's an example. So if I've got a police officer that just shot someone who we know from physical evidence they were holding a cell phone, not a gun, I may not want them to know that till they give me a statement.
I see.
Why did you shoot that person? Well, they came up with a gun. How do you know it was a gun? Blah, blah, blah. And so that will keep them from being charged criminally, because these are split-second decisions, and if you make the wrong one, you might not come home.
So I'll throw another example at you, because these are real scenarios. And so based on what I saw from the video, I'm like, this cop, bad. But I don't know. There was another lady, police officer, who, there was a guy, I think he was driving. She went to pull out her taser and pulled out her firearm. Shot the guy a couple times. It happened, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. Guy dies, and she even acknowledged verbally in the video cam, like, I pulled my taser. I was trying to get my taser, not my firearm, and she kills the guy. Now she actually went to jail, I think 2nd degree, or maybe it was manslaughter.
That was the BART shooting?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. I can tell you, when I was the North Precinct commander in Seattle, we had an incident that was caught in a holding cell that did not look good. I had assigned a sergeant. I'm like, see if you can slow that video down, because it looks like this officer just slammed this kid's head against this thing for no reason. Well, I have his statement of what he said he did and why he did what he did. I'm like, it's not lining up with the video. Once we were able to slow that video down, I saw everything. And then kind of the rest of the story is that officer was like a 3rd-degree black belt in judo. And so he's got a hold of the person's arm, is feeling the muscles moving and stuff, and you could actually see the weight shifting. He's like, I knew this guy was turning and was going to assault me. And I'm like, I'm not seeing it until we slowed it down.
Oh, and then you actually saw it, and the officer was correct.
Then you could actually see, okay, the weight shifting. Absolutely, this person was looking to turn on them, just because the person was so in tune with, right, the physical nature of an attack. I mean, I could show video to a group of cops and like, what is going to happen here? Well, that guy is going to kick that guy's butt. Most citizens are going to say, don't know.
Don't even see it.
Whereas that's what we do. And so there is an element, it's not perfect, but there's a lot of science behind a good, solid use of force investigation.
Interesting. Let me ask you a couple other questions. And we're mainly in the law enforcement area. So your view of what we call capital punishment. You'd favor capital punishment or not?
As long as we get it right.
Yeah. And I would agree with you. I mean,
Yeah.
Genesis 9:6 is clear that the Bible is in favor of it, but I would completely agree with that. You have to get it right.
Yeah, I am not horribly comfortable with it myself.
It's so final.
Right. Because what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If, we found out this is wrong. I mean, we already know people have gone to prison and then it turns out it wasn't them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's awful final. The main reason is if you've taken them out of society, what's the threat to society? I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, I hear you.
I can tell you my thoughts on this has flip-flopped throughout the years, and it's probably more to, wow, we sent this person to prison for 8 years and they didn't do it.
Mm-hmm. And even some of the, and I'm back and forth on that too. I think probably most people that are honest, they have to be. Like even in California, there's been a lot of reforms in terms of sentencing. And I think like I mean, just looking back, and I mean, you probably have a view of this, but like a lot of people, put in prison for a good amount of years over marijuana violations or mild drug, things they've done wrong. Versus I would certainly say violent felons or people that are violent probably need to be incarcerated and kept away from the general public. But sometimes those people that are just using drugs, no victim, no crime stuff. If you're just consuming drugs, should you have been incarcerated for so long? I don't even know, but I lean more toward. I see some of the good of it. I just don't know either. It's so hard. There's so many factors going at it that I'm not sure. I don't know.
There's a lot. I mean, you certainly see how society has moved to where it's at today, right? Whether that's evil forces beyond our control, or whether there is such a thing as is there a deterrent effect? I just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm like, there's crimes of passion, which most homicides are crimes of passion. They're not calculated. They occur. It doesn't matter what you threaten a person if they do it because they're not thinking logically.
Yeah, nonetheless, it's a tough job being a cop.
Tough job.
Like you said, split second decisions. I mean, anything could happen.
I've told my son, I said, man, you could mess up your whole career in 10 seconds or less. Just one bad decision. You're amped up on, your adrenaline's running. Something happens. You think this is the person. Potentially your career's over in a few seconds, right? I mean, you can make a split second decision and it's career ending and potentially somebody even losing their life.
But it sounds like if there is something that the police officer did, not wrong, but it looks like he did something wrong. It sounds to me like they would give him more grace, more favor, more protection than the person that they killed or whatever. Would you agree with that? Or
well,
no?
Police officers are authorized to use force, including deadly force. No one else is. There is a constant buzz out in the if I had done that, I'd be in prison. Why isn't the cop? Well, the cop has an obligation to stop that incident.
That's good. Everybody
right?
needs to hear this.
And people need to understand that, look, it's different. I guarantee you, yes, if you shot that person or whatever, you're going to prison. The police officer, it may be justified, or they also get a little more grace because they're not allowed to just walk away. They own it.
Is that sort of like there's something called qualified immunity, where in some senses, and there's a debate that's out there as to whether, and the Supreme Court's already made the decision, but like there's a ongoing discussion on it. Like, so police officers are, if in the act of, let's say here locally, whatever police officer does something, generally they're defended by like the DA or they already have counsel representative where it's not personal, right? They have some level of immunity too.
Yes, but make no mistake about it. Police officers are taught and trained. This is what you do in this situation. This is the force you're to use. This is how you're supposed to do it. And if a police officer does everything the way we trained them to do it, they're still a de facto suspect in a capital murder investigation. Make no mistake about it. It's a different world.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it turns out that there's got sideways, so they get cleared criminally or not. Even if they do get cleared criminally, now they have to face the department for, did you step out of line with policy? Did you step out of line with the way we trained you? And then they also are going to get sued civilly. So it's almost triple jeopardy for the police officers. And it's a long road.
So with all your experience that you've accumulated throughout the years, and you're obviously very knowledgeable, have you thought about doing like consultant company or something like that?
I don't know.
It's a lot.
How long ago have you been retired for?
A few months.
Yeah, it's just been a handful of months. I'm really focused on taking care of myself right now. At 38 years, 37, kind of took a toll. And
mentally, the stress and the strain.
Yeah, mentally, even physically. Mm-hmm. I lost like 30 pounds without trying. And my doctor says, well, that's because your cortisol levels have returned to normal. You don't have that stress.
Wow.
And I'm like in a month, I lost like 30 pounds, which is good, but my cholesterol levels have returned to a normal range for the first time in years. It's been an interesting, I've got more time on my hands when I go to the doctor to do my physical, and I'm like, that is the lowest cholesterol I've ever seen. Like, you have no stress anymore.
Got it. Let me ask a couple questions. First Amendment, I think you probably know what it is. Second Amendment would be one that falls behind it. Personally, I'm like, I've raised my kids to be country. I sort of, I'm biasing myself so you'll know where I'm coming from. I believe in the Second Amendment. What is your perspective in terms of the average citizen, firearms, Second Amendment overall? From law enforcement, years you've been in it, what's your opinion or perspective on that?
Well, there's a lot of guns out there.
There is.
I'm not thrilled with who's all got them.
I'm sure.
And even if a person is forbidden from having a firearm, they're going to get it if they want it.
Absolutely.
I've seen it repeatedly, right? This is a convicted felon who's not allowed to have them, and we're going to send them to prison again for having one, and then they'll get let out, and then they'll do it again. I don't know whether, it's not 1870 in Kentucky.
True.
So it also kind of depends on what's your environment. Do you want people doing open carry on the campus of UCLA? Probably not. So if someone's going to have a firearm, they better know how to use it and better know when and when not to. They have to have some proficiency, but more than that, they need to understand the awesome power if you take someone's life with it.
For sure. Yeah. So he's probably not as... So then, say, for example, locally in Riverside County, they've started issuing a lot of CCWs. And it used to be that you had to have just cause, and then now it's been altered. And that's actually a Supreme Court decision where you don't need just cause now. It's just if you can prove, you're competent and that you don't have a criminal career, now you basically, in Riverside County, they'll issue a CCW. Your opinion, are you favor that or don't?
Well, I can tell you when I took over Indio, we got out of the CCW business. Not just for the reason I didn't want to give firearms to folks, but or CCW privileges, like small agency, short-staffed. It took us a year to get all the steps done, and then we still said no. And I'm like, let's not do this anymore. It's stupid. Send them to the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
And so...
But do you favor what's happened in Riverside County where so many people do?
As long as as long as they're using them correctly, I'm okay with it.
I don't think there's been an
Right.
example of
Right.
not. So, yeah. So
The fact of the matter is, it's extremely rare here or in Seattle for anyone, like a gangster's not going to get a CCW permit. They're
Right.
just not, because they couldn't get one anyway. They're still going to be armed. So
sure.
it's kind of like, well, who are you regulating? These are the rule followers,
true.
right? It's kind of like you didn't get a permit to do your demonstration. Yeah, we're not going to.
That's
Okay.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
Obviously, Raul has one. I've applied for one as well. So the CCW. So I'm in favor, in my opinion, or reading, and there's going to be different ones in terms of what the Second Amendment means. But I think it has to do with being able to defend yourself and those you love. So it's not the thing of, I don't know, angrily driving or trying to threaten people. It's more the CCWs and even the Second Amendment. That to me sort of ties into the reality of allowing the honest citizen to defend themselves and those that they love. And I would argue to those that, and I understand there has to be some kind of restrictions on firearms, for sure. But in countries where they're completely banned, like Mexico, just south of us, it's anarchy, even to this day, because all the bad guys have guns. And until the farmers and average people rose up and said, let's get our own guns, that's the only way they begin to push back in certain areas against it. So bad guys always will.
Yep.
And you're right. I think the good guys probably.
And in Mexico, you could only get like really old, crappy guns.
Muskets.
Yeah, like my mother-in-law lives in a ranch in Mexico, and I'm like, suegra, you should have like something to protect yourself. Well, let's ask around. So ask a cousin of a cousin in Mexico, and we got one. And this gun is like super old, rusty. The wood is chipping, and they're
right.
expensive.
Oh, I'm sure. Let's segue off this just for a
Yeah.
second. We'll start heading toward a close. But how long you been married?
I'd have to do the math. It'll be 37 years.
37 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the past few years, I believe your wife has some health issues. What's the diagnosis specifically?
She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in her early 50s.
Yeah. And so at this point, she needs 24-hour care. Is that correct?
She has for quite a while. She's not difficult to take care of anymore. I mean, the stuff, trying to walk out of the house, disrobing. I mean, she really is kind of past all that. She's not really communicative anymore. She's still a blessing to me.
Wow.
And I try not to think about what I've lost, right? But
What have you learned in that process? Like, I mean, you make vows, you commit to, for your sake, your family. But like, what have you learned through that? What has God taught you sort of in that process of navigating the past few years?
well, I really have, as the Bible says, peace beyond understanding, because I'm okay where we're at. This is what it is. And I bought a book, or my son bought it for me, I can't remember, a guy by the name of John Dunlop. He's an MD, geriatric medicine, and he wrote a book called Finding Grace in Dementia. And he talks about how there are no gradations to being made in God's image. Let that sink in a little bit. So it's all about honoring, the person with this. You got to get your head around it, because the beginning stages are probably the hardest,
Dramatic.
because you don't know what's going on. I mean, my wife was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis a long time ago. So when we moved here,
That's actually why you came here, correct? One of the motivations coming here was
we were told that maybe the environment would help her.
more
But,
sunshine.
Yeah. So I was taking her to UCLA, and I'm like, she's forgetting stuff. She's getting lost on the way to church, that kind of stuff. And we went round and round for quite a while, and finally it was actually because she had brain scans for over 10 years because of her MS, I got all those records, and then they're like, yeah, we see all the brain atrophy now from the beginning moving forward. But it was really, it's difficult in the beginning because you're like, you just get frustrated. This is an adult. Why can't you?
Blank.
Right.
Do this, do that.
You know, you just peed in the corner of the house or whatever. I mean, it is what it is. And so when you look at them as they're regressing, you wouldn't get mad at an infant for soiling themselves. This is where they're at. And so I would say that I'm in a really good place with it. Would I like it to be different? Of course. But I also see a lot of good that's come out of it. My son Matthew, who lives with us, I bought him a Bible one year for Christmas. And Matthew, I could tell he wasn't thrilled. And
You bought him what?
a Bible.
Oh, okay.
Is it he's sort of questioning his faith, or just having?
Right. So, he'd been raised in church, like, because that's what we did. And so he finally just told me, he broke down crying, and he said, I'm mad at God for what he's done to my mom. And I'm like, and that was the beginning of his healing. And his faith is now strong.
Wow.
He reads that Bible every day.
Nice.
I prayed a couple of years ago to bring a godly woman into his life, and he's going to be getting married in April.
Good for him. How old is he?
He is 32.
Wow. And how old is your youngest?
My youngest is going to turn 18 next month.
And is that a daughter?
Daughter, yes.
And she lives with you?
Correct.
How has navigating the season with your wife's health been for the kids? So, obviously it's going to have certain kinds of, you've come to peace with it. Your son struggled with it. How about your other children in terms of how have they navigated that season with you?
I see one of my kids is kind of ignoring stuff.
Yeah.
Right. The other's more engaged. I would say Matthew's very engaged. He would take care of his mom when it was one of the reasons he didn't move away earlier was I need to be here and help you take care of mom type thing. And my daughter, I could tell she was really, it's been a struggle. I sitting at when Carrie was not as far as progressed as she is now. I remember we're sitting having dinner, and she looked at Carrie, my wife, looks at Katie and says, do your parents know you're eating dinner with us? How do you answer that when you're, 12, 13-year-old girl? And so that's stuff that, first of all, in your 50s to get Alzheimer's is not a good thing, but when you have a young child that is also lost her mom, right, and you're in a household of men, well, the two of us, and so I really try to engage with her a lot. I'm taking her to Disneyland. Last year I took her to San Francisco for a week, and the year before or San Diego. San Francisco the year before that. So I've always really tried, even before any of this, to really give each kid one-on-one time, like go away somewhere.
You have 2 children then?
I got a total of 4.
4. Wow.
3 sons and a daughter.
And the daughter's the youngest?
Correct.
Wow.
Got 2 grandsons as well.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Whew.
That's powerful.
It's beautiful to hear your story. So then, closing things out, and Raul, you can say anything after this. As far as your faith in God, all the seasons you've been through, I know obviously you're stepping into sort of retirement, but even with your wife, along the way, your view of God? From what I've heard here and even in the past, how has all that you've been through, how's that impacted your walk with God?
Frankly, it's strengthened it.
I would think so.
And it's where I derive joy and power and clarity. I literally had actually, Pastor Nate, you turned me on to the Bible app, right? And I'm like, I'm going to focus on the Holy Spirit and getting my joy back. And so I was struggling with, I guess, some of the transitional stuff of, okay, now what I've been a type A, always on the go, 24/7 kind of person to it's almost all stop. What do I need to do next? I really felt that policing was the calling put on my life by God. Now what? And so I entered into prayer and fasting at the end of June, beginning of July. And on July 5th, I had every answer that I was seeking.
Wow.
Yeah, like not linear, instantaneously, I knew everything.
That's awesome.
And so the Spirit just revealed to me, your assignment right now is taking care of yourself, your wife, and your daughter. I will tell you what's next when that time comes.
That's good.
That's powerful.
I've tried to say this before. I think the Holy Spirit's always talking and we're just not listening. And
good.
the busyness of life and the noise of everything that's around us, all the digital distractions, the Holy Spirit's still talking. It's just we can't hear him.
So one of the things that I did is I'm reading the book that you recommended on the God I Never Knew. But I also, John Dunlop, the one who wrote Finding Grace in Dementia, also wrote a book on retirement. And he talks about, and which is what I'm doing, he talks about take a sabbatical, recommit yourself to God, return to your first love. And I'm like, that's what it's been all about. So I spend almost an hour not asking for stuff, but worshiping every day.
That's so good.
And so, and I continue to get encouragement. I found my joy on July 5th, literally.
That's beautiful.
And all of it just fell into place.
That's beautiful.
Well, that's a great way to end the podcast. And
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your personal story. And I know that there's going to be listeners that for sure they're going to get that help, and they're probably, maybe some of them are wondering, what now? And that was perfect. Thank you. You helped me with that for sure. So you blessed me with that. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.